Let us see how we will examine the gastrointestinal system. Examination of gastrointestinal system has got a couple of steps. Number 1, examination of oral cavity. 2, inspection. 3, palpation of abdomen. 4 will be percussion. 5 will be auscultation. And then we have examination of perectal examination. That will complete the gastrointestinal system. As we approach the patient to look at him, we will be first seeing his lips. Lips itself may give a diagnostic clue. Swollen lips of Crohn's disease is known to everybody. We may also see cracks and fissures. There may be cheilitis of the lips. Lips may show black colored spots of Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, that is familial disease predisposing for internal malignancy. There may be clue of hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia over the lips, which may be the cause for anemia of this patient or gastrointestinal bleed. Once the patients open the mouth, we are seeing the teeth, and teeth may be discolored in people who have consumed tetracyclines during their childhood, or in patients who are exposed to fluorosis because they were residing in areas of the world where fluorosis was very common. Sometimes you may be able to see a peculiar shaped, peg-shaped central incisor teeth of congenital syphilis, where the teeth margin is notched and it is rounded in cross section. Sometimes there may not be a teeth at all. Patient may be edentulous. The cause needs to be found out. So number of teeth is very important. Caries teeth is very commonly seen in people with Sjogren syndrome, and it has got a peculiar appearance as well. People with acromegaly may be having widely separated teeth, and there may be evidence of prognathism as well. Having examined the lips and teeth, then we have a look at the gums. Gums can be hypertrophied because of the drugs we are using, like a calcium channel blocker, anti-epileptic drugs like phenytoin, or drugs used for transplant patients like cyclosporine. There may be a lead line of lead poisoning, or there may be herpetic gingival stomatitis, where you can see vesicles on the surface. Acute myeloid leukemia is well known to present as hypertrophied bleeding gums. Bleeding gums can also be seen in scurvy, and gums can also show evidence of aphthous ulcers, which may be benign, or there may be ulcers suggestive of Behçet syndrome. Examining the tongue, we may look at the size of the tongue, which is unusually large in case of acromegaly, hypothyroidism, amyloidosis. And looking at the tongue at rest in the mouth, we may be able to see whether atrophied, fissured, and with fasciculations or not. As a patient protrudes the tongue, we may also make out whether deviation at all. Tremor of the tongue sometimes occur in people with the Parkinson's disease, also in people with tabes dorsalis. Dry tongue of dehydration, loss of papilla of glossitis, it can also be seen when you're looking at the tongue of these patients. Then we are looking at the palate. We may be able to see erosions, as in case of SLE. There may be ulcers, malignancy, or color changes may be there. Looking at the oral cavity, we will be able to see the movement of the palate and the pharynx as well, and neurological deficits can be seen. The mucosa of the oral cavity may show thrush. That may be the only clue to diagnosis of retrovirus infections like HIV. There may be leukoplakia or carcinoma, or there may be pigmentation of Addison's disease. That may also give clue to the diagnosis. And when the patient opens the mouth for examination, the odor of alcohol is familiar to everybody, and the sweet smell of acetone that can be found out, fishy smell of renal failure, particular smell of methyl mercaptan of hepatic encephalopathy, or you may get fecal odor as in patients suffering with gastrojejunocolic fistula. So oral cavity examination may give couple of diagnosis in case of gastrointestinal system. Along with that, we will also be having to look at the salivary glands. Is there a enlarged parotid gland, submandibular or sublingual glands? Then you are going to do the inspection, palpation, percussion and auscultation. What is the position of the patient when you are going to inspect and palpate the abdomen? Depending upon the patient's convenience, you may put in any bed at any position, but patient must be undressed from pubic symphysis to cephisternum. That much area must be exposed for the examination. We do examine abdomen in the standing position so that we don't miss any prominent dilated veins. Male patients, we have to check the external genitalia, commonly done in the standing position, and hernia and hernial orifices needs to be checked in either sex in the standing position. So that's why we put the patient in the standing position also while we examining the patient. And having done that, we put the patient in the supine position with single pillow alone. The examination of abdomen is not done in the 45 degrees proper position. It cannot be done in this position properly. Patient has to be supine. So supine position is the best for examination of abdomen. Female patients particularly, we need to empty the bladder. Otherwise, we may think there's a pelvic mass coming up. And our hands must be always be warm. While examining the abdomen, if you find dilated veins, we need to find out what's the direction of the flow of the veins. 2 fingers are used for this purpose to empty the vein, and take off one finger and see the speed with which the vein is filling, and repeat the other end and see the direction of flow. Inferior venical obstruction, we expect the flow to be upwards and superior venical obstruction downwards. And in portal hypertension, the dilated veins flow is away from the umbilicus. Away from the umbilicus, above the umbilicus upwards, and below the umbilicus downwards. We look at the shape of the abdomen. Shape of the abdomen is variable from individual to individual depending upon whether obese or not. Anyway, basically it is a scaphoid and it moves with the respiration, and flanks are usually concave. But there may be distension abdomen, generalized distension as in case of ascites with a bulge on the flanks. But if it's distension due to pregnancy, we expect it to be anterior posterior. So also masses arising from the pelvis, it will be anterior posterior movement. If there is a distension of abdomen, we look whether it's a localized distension or is it a generalized distension. Anyway, we will take the measurement at the left umbilicus, circumference of abdomen will be measured. Also we will take the measurement from the umbilicus to pubic symphysis and cephisternum to umbilicus. Usually they are equal. If there is a disparity, it may be because of mass in the lower abdomen or in the upper abdomen, and we have to look for it. Striae of the abdomen will be staring at us. And the source of the scars. Different types of scars are seen in the abdomen, and that will tell you what type of surgery the patient has undergone. Classical scars of cholecystectomy, appendicectomy, hysterectomy, pancreatic surgeries, liver surgeries are all known to us. So also transplant scars may be seen. Scars of laparoscopy may be seen. They all give clue what exactly was happening to this patient. So scars are very, very important in the examination of abdomen. If the abdomen is not moving during inspiration, most likely they are suffering with guarding or rigidity of peritonitis. So movement of abdomen is important. If the symptoms are suggestive of obstruction, we have to specifically look for visible peristalsis by asking the patient to drink some fluid and then checking again the peristalsis appearing or not. Once the patient is comfortable in that position, you are going to palpate the abdomen. So here we have to be very specific where exactly is the pathology. For this purpose, we divide the abdomen into 4 quadrants. Draw a line in the midline downwards vertically, another line horizontally over the umbilicus. So that divide the abdomen into 4 quadrants, and you can see the bulge or swelling of which quadrant. To be more specific, we divide the abdomen into 9 areas. These 9 areas are divided by two vertical lines and two horizontal lines. Vertical lines come from the midclavicular line downwards, and horizontal line, upper one just at the lower margin of the rib cage, and next one is over the line joining the anterior superior iliac spines. So we have right hypochondria, epigastria, left hypochondria, left lumbar, umbilical area, right lumbar. We have right iliac fossa, hypogastrium, and left iliac fossa. We have 9 areas, and we are going to palpate these 9 areas. Ask the patient whether there is a tenderness at any point. That area should be seen last, and take care the patient is not hurt by examination. We have to have very warm, dry hands when we examine this patient, and tell the patient and reassure what you are going to do. First, we will do the simple superficial palpation of the 9 areas, where we will find out which is the area all have got tenderness, which all area there is resistance to movement or underlying mass lesion. Ask the patient lie down flat, head turned to the opposite side, mouth open, and take breathing slowly. He takes breath slowly, and we are going to palpate. It is enough if you position the patient with the leg straight, supine position, but if you are particular to get more relaxation, there is no harm in flexing the knee and the hip. Both techniques can be adopted. You put your hand on different 9 areas of the abdomen and see if there is any tenderness. Having done this, we have made sure there is no area of tenderness or mass lesion. They are going to palpate with specific purpose to look for different organs. First, we start from the right iliac fossa, keeping the hand such a way that our finger is parallel to the rib margin or liver margin, and gradually move up, and patient keep on taking deep breath. We move the finger up only when during expiration, and then patient take deep breath, and the organ liver, if at all it's enlarged, will come and touch your finger. At that particular point, you measure how much is enlarged below the right costal margin. Subsequently, during percussion, we will be finding out the upper border and see how much is the span of the liver. After getting the liver, we find out whether the liver is soft like our lips, firm like our nose, or hard like our chin, and then denote with tender or not. What is surface like, smooth or irregular? What's the edge margin, rounded or sharp? And then we are looking for whether it is pulsatile or not by doing bimanual palpation, keeping 2 hands together. Then we are going for palpation of the spleen. Spleen commonly enlarges to right iliac fossa. To avoid missing the splenomegaly, we always palpate from the right iliac fossa, gradually go to the left hypochondrium. Always keep the fingers parallel to spleen margin, and as you proceed further, as the patient takes deep breath, the spleen is enlarged, it will come and touch your finger. Wait for the spleen to come and touch you. During inspiration, it will come and touch the finger. Once you feel the spleen, you find out how much centimeter is enlarged. The splenomegaly is measured along the axis of the spleen, and you describe how many centimeters it is enlarged. You look at the margin and see if the notch of the spleen is palpable, whether you can get above the swelling spleen, and whether it is ballotable or not. These things are done to differentiate it from a close differential diagnosis, maybe enlarged kidney. Having done this examination, you are going to palpate the kidney right and left. Here we do the bimanual palpation. After having palpated an ordinary course, you do the bimanual palpation also to find out the kidneys are palpable or not. So these 4 organs you have tested, you are going to palpate for bladder, so hypogastrium. You are going to palpate for mass in the right iliac fossa, left iliac fossa, umbilical area, epigastric area, and if the gallbladder is palpable or not. So you are specifically looking for certain organs, and if you find pulsatile impulses in the abdomen, make sure they are not aortic aneurysm. For which purpose, you look the pulsation, whether it is transmitted or it is expansile. Expansile pulsation, 2 fingers you keep over the swelling will be going away, unlike a transmitted pulsation which will moving up and down. So during inspection, the pulsation of the abdomen It's very important finding. And palpation, we have to confirm there is a aneurysm or not. So, having done this palpation, we are going to percuss the abdomen. And percussion of the abdomen is done first to delineate the margins organs. First, you percuss the liver upper border in two spaces, mid-clavicular line and mid-axillary line. These two planes we have to percuss out, and the line joining the points of dullness of these two planes will be the upper border of the liver. From that, you take the inch tape, measuring tape, and measure what is the span of the liver. Alternatively, you may also percuss the liver lower border from the right iliac fossa and move upwards till you get dullness. Percussion of abdomen, commonly you get tympanic resonance, and of the liver it will be dull. Coming to the percussion of the spleen, we have to percuss out the trough space. It's a space bounded by sixth rib in the left side, sixth rib. You have got the rib margin, and then from mid-axillary line, 10th rib along the rib. That is the trough space. You percuss out, it is expected to be resonant. The area is occupied by the fundus of the stomach. If it is dull, you have to think one possible cause is splenomegaly. A better technique to look for dullness of spleen is to make the patient lie down supine position, draw two lines downwards, anterior axillary line and mid-axillary line, and the lower rib space, intercostal space between these two lines. You percuss out, normal position, and during deep inspiration, and if even during deep inspiration there is dullness, that is splenomegaly. Commonly this is a very reliable finding. These are two techniques for detecting of dullness of spleen. The percussion of spleen is very important because spleen is always dull on percussion. Kidney is always resonant on the left side because of the overlying colon. So colon helps us to differentiate between spleen and kidney on the left side. Kidney is always resonant, spleen is always dull. This important physical finding is commonly not stressed and so commonly missed. You miss spleen for kidney and vice versa. If there is any doubt, always percuss and see kidney is always resonant and spleen is always dull. Now you are looking for free fluid in the abdomen. Free fluid in the abdomen is tested by percussing from the epigastrium downwards to the umbilicus. At the level of umbilicus, you go either way for dullness, and if you get dullness, tilt the patient and see there is shifting dullness. And also you can check for fluid thrill in this position. Having done the percussion, you go for the last part, percussion for the urinary bladder. Once it's emptied, we don't expect any dullness there, but if it is persisting, we have to find out why it is so, and maybe because of bladder neck obstruction or a pelvic mass coming over there. Last part of the examination of the gastrointestinal system is auscultation and rectal examination. Auscultation is done with the diaphragm of the stethoscope. We are specifically looking for peristaltic sounds in a suspected case of peritonitis, which will be absent. In case of gastrointestinal bleed or obstruction, it will be more than normal. And we also auscultate over the liver with the three things in mind. One is bruit. Bruit is commonly seen in case of hepatocellular carcinoma or alcoholic hepatitis. And technique of examination for liver bruit is by first of all marking out the boundaries of the liver, and inch by inch auscultation, a whole of the liver is done with the diaphragm of the stethoscope, and the bruit may be audible. Also, you have to check for hepatic rub. It may be suggestive of a perihepatitis because of any etiology, including liver biopsy or aspiration of liver abscess or metastasis. We have to auscultate spleen if it's enlarged for a splenic rub, which indicates there is perisplenitis, commonly due to infarction of the spleen because it's very much enlarged, which produces secondary perisplenitis and we get a splenic rub. Auscultation continues to the blood vessels. If there's a renal artery stenosis, we have to auscultate over the particular spot, that is area just above on either side of the umbilicus is the site of the renal artery. You may auscultate there for bruit either side. Just below midline is the area of the last part of the aorta. Again, we may get a bruit there, and lower down iliac and femoral bruits may also be heard. Elsewhere in the abdomen, we may get bruit from mesenteric vessels also if they are narrowed down. Once you finish auscultation, you have to go for rectal examination, which is compulsory for gastrointestinal diseases. Thank you.